Okay, so I wanted to start by talking about why you want to conduct post-approval monitoring. It's not specifically mandated under the common rule. I did go through and try and pull out some regulatory citations that lend itself towards why you would want to keep track of what's happening after IRB approval. So under 109, it says obviously it gives IRB the authority to observe the consent process and the research once it's active. Under 113, you'll see that it says an IRB shall have the authority to suspend or terminate approval of research that is not being conducted in accordance with the IRB's requirements or that has been associated with harm to subjects. So that also lends itself to monitoring. And then finally, under 123, it talks about the granting agency being able to not fund if they feel that the PI or others have materially failed to discharge responsibility for the protection of rights and welfare of subjects. So that's really the only place in the common rule that it talks about a monitoring function. But importantly, and I don't know how many institutions that are attending today are AHRP accredited, but AHRP requires it. And it's one of those things with AHRP that kind of goes above and beyond the regulations. There's a standard at 1.5 that talks about measuring and improving compliance. One is related to specific study compliance, and one is related to the compliance of the HRPP itself. I'm not going to talk about the latter one, but it does say that you should conduct audits or surveys or use other methods to assess compliance with policies and procedures. So, you know, that's kind of the regulatory basis for doing monitoring. You want to set goals for your post-approval monitoring program. You know, we're a small SBER program. We really want to focus on education. It's really important to present a monitoring activity as an educational activity for those who are participating. You want to provide education to help maintain compliance with policies and procedures. You obviously want to verify that the research is being conducted as it was approved by the IRB. And most importantly, you want to ensure that any findings of serious or continuing noncompliance are addressed and reported if that's part of your policies and procedures and if it's a federally funded project. You know, ultimately, the IRB's goal is to enhance protection of research participants and improve the quality of the data that's being collected. All right, so you need to set goals, and I think it's really important that you're realistic, and you don't want to shoot for the sky if you don't need to. You know, and I understand that a lot of offices are doing this in their spare time, right? So you're processing, you know, a lot of us have small staffs. So you want to do what you can do and execute appropriately. So be realistic. When you're thinking about what you want to do for quality assurance, really look at the demographics of your research portfolio. You know, what % of your studies are greater than minimal risk? What % are federally funded? What types of other funding do you have? Do you have, you know, Department of Education funding? Do you have NSF funding? You know, what type of funding do you have? That's important to note. And the number of FTEs you have dedicated to your IRB, right? So you got to be realistic with that. I recommend what I did with my program is you kind of set a goal to start. So you say, okay, we're going to, let's say, do 2% of our active projects in a year. And you can, you know, that's totally reasonable. And if you look at that, that could be, you know, maybe just like 8 studies, right, that you have to do over the course of a year, or, you know, whatever. You also want to seek external resources. Now, we probably, not many of us have these, but some organizations have an office of compliance or a QA department or a research compliance office that's outside of the IRB. If you have the luxury of having one of those, reach out to them and see if you can team up with them to help with this process, right? Because maybe they can, you know, play a role in helping, if not auditing research, active research, then help with auditing your office and making sure that you guys are following process and procedures. Most importantly, follow through. So if you set a goal, make sure that you follow through with that and touch bases with the person doing it, etc. All right. So how do you decide what studies to focus on? Because obviously, if you're only doing a small percentage of your portfolio, you want to, get your biggest bang for your buck, right? So for me, when I was looking at that, I definitely concentrated on federally funded projects because those obviously come with increased responsibility. We have equivalent protections policy, so our federally funded projects at UNM kind of go a different route of review than our non-federally funded. I know that's not very common, but we definitely want to make sure that our federally funded projects are getting monitored. Projects or PIs with a history of non-compliance. If you have someone who's, struggles with IRB and maybe someone who has a lot of active projects, maybe you want to work with them and help them set up their program, their research so that it's in a compliant manner. I really like to focus on studies that have external regulations involved. So if you have studies that invoke HIPAA, that comes with some liability. So those are great projects to focus on. For us, we don't really deal with HIPAA as much as we deal with FERPA. We have tons of studies that invoke FERPA regulations. So we have just recently started monitoring those studies by doing consent reviews. And I'm going to go through each type of monitoring activity separately, but FERPA is a big one. So that's a good one to focus on. Vulnerable populations, obviously. Studies that have special training requirements. We had a study through our exercise science department where they were going to do muscle biopsies. It was a fairly new procedure, so we wanted to make sure that people were being trained appropriately and signed off as they had proposed. So that's a study that we went in and did some monitoring on. Sensitive information, substance use, mental health data. So studies that are working with highly sensitive identifiable data, or studies that are working with external sites. If you have studies that are in the public school system, those are great ones to do, or external clinics. So that's just something to think about. This isn't a hard, solid list, but it's just going to give you an idea of where you might want to focus your energy when you're developing your post-approval monitoring program. So this slide is a little more of process. In our program, any active project can be selected for post-approval monitoring, and that includes exempt projects, which is, I think, unusual. But quite a few of our exempt studies are being done in classrooms and stuff like that, and working with vulnerable populations. So, even though they're exempt, they are still human subject research, and so we still monitor them. That may not be where you want to focus your energy, but it's just something to think about. So in our program, at the time of initial or continuing review, the IRB reviewer or the board, if it's a full study, will recommend a PAN activity. And they do that based on the procedures in the study. So they might select one that they feel is appropriate. Our staff retains the right to modify that recommendation based on resources and other considerations, such as, we just monitored that study, or we just can't do this many this month, or, so you can work with that. At the beginning of the month, we have a person who selects the PAM activities for that month, and we try to do 2 to 3 a month. She then enters those study numbers into a random number generator. So it's truly a random monitoring activity. And then she reviews to see if it's appropriate to do monitoring. So is it open to enrollment? We're not going to go monitor a study that just got approved and hasn't started enrolling people yet. And we're not going to monitor a study that we've monitored recently. We also look at the end date for a study. So if it's at the end of its life and it's in data analysis, we might not choose to monitor that particular project that month. And then we send the PI and the student investigator, if it's a student project, a notification that notifies them of what the monitoring activity is. We provide them tools or forms and then provide them a date which it must be completed. So it's important to really develop written procedures. And for instance, if you're asking someone to do a self-assessment, you know, once they return that self-assessment, we review it and publish a letter of findings. We always note good practices. It's really important to tell them what they're doing right, as well as any findings with any recommendations for improvement. If we're doing a consent form audit, we'll set up a time to go on site to audit signed consent forms. We had to get creative in the past year with the pandemic. So we actually set up a secure document sharing software with our IT department, and it allows PIs to upload their consent forms into that shared space so that our staff can then review them and then make sure that they're secure and that there's no, you know, confidentiality risks with that. So that's what we've been doing this past year, and it's actually worked out really good. So if you can't physically get on site, there's alternative ways to do that. So we had to figure out a way to make sure people followed through, right? Because we want to make sure that they're not ignoring our requests. So we made sure to write into our policy that a lack of response by a PI to a monitoring request is considered non-compliance. So if we, knock on wood, we haven't had that happen yet, but if we did, you know, we would do a non-compliance review. It may result in a process hold from them being able to submit future submissions, an audit, or, you know, perhaps involving faculty leadership if needed. You know, again, we haven't had that come up, but you really have to have some kind of hammer in order to make sure people are following through with what you're requesting. You know, and when you do these, you may find stuff. And if you do have a reportable finding, it may result in a request for the researcher to submit an event form if it's something that was identified as an unanticipated problem, or if there's serious issues, the IRB may decide to go ahead and move to a full audit of that project. So just be prepared for that. Okay, now I'm going to move into the different types of post-approval monitoring activities that we do at UNM. These aren't all inclusive. Well, these are just things we came up with, you know, looking at other IRBs. So this is the laundry list, and I'm going to go through each one of those and kind of explain what it is and how we utilize that tool. So administrative check-in. This has just turned into from a crazy idea to something that's been super helpful. This came about with the revised common rule, and we're kind of figuring out, well, now that we're not going to have continuing review on almost every one of our studies, how are we going to keep track of these things? We used to really have a problem with approvals lapsing, mainly for student projects, when the student leaves and they never close their project. So what we've done is any study now that does not have a continuing review, which is a majority of our minimal risk studies, automatically is assigned an administrative check-in. Okay, and that's done by our staff. Even if the reviewer doesn't check in on the checklist, we will go ahead and assign an administrative check-in. And what that is we email the PI at a designated time point. So in our protocol template, we ask them to identify when their project, they expect the project to be done. And by done, I mean, you're done enrollment and you're done analyzing identifiable data. So at initial review, they give us a proposed date, and that's what we enter into our database. And then when that time comes up, we send them an email with a link to a survey, which is just a Google form, where we ask them to answer a few questions. And it reminds them as well of their obligation to submit amendments in event reports, even though they don't have continuing review. So it's a little bit of a reminder as well. And then based on the feedback from that check-in, we will either close the project if they're done, if they answer the question, yes, and done, we will go ahead and close it on their behalf, or we will extend that date out. If they say, I need another year, we'll extend the date out, and then a year later, we're going to send them another administrative check-in. Okay. These are the questions we ask. Again, we just made these up. We were trying to figure, what do we want to know about a project that's ongoing? So obviously the first bit deals with, is the project still active and does it still require IRB oversight? And then the last few questions is really like, has there been any problems that we haven't been made aware of? Has the funding changed? That's a big one for us, because especially because we have two different review tracks for federally funded and non-federally funded. So if somewhere along the line they received federal funding and they forgot to tell us, that's a problem when we need to re-review that project. So we asked them about funding. And then, is there anything else we need to know? So this is kind of the questions. And, you know, we were really like, wow, people are just going to ignore us, you know, because people tend to ignore notifications from the IRB. But I think because we made it so simple, our response rate has been like 99%. I mean, very rarely does my staff have to send me someone who hasn't responded to this request. So it's been super successful. And I think it's really helped the communication and the general oversight of our projects. So that's the administrative check-in. And what's nice about that is you can actually have a student send out the email if you have help. I mean, there's lots of ways you can do it to lessen the burden on the IRB. Okay, so self-assessment is also a really cool tool that we developed to kind of have the PIs do their own audit, right? So it's not so much our work to do it, we let them do it. So we will send them a checklist, which is, all this is on our website, and you guys are welcome to look at these in more detail. I didn't have space to put the entire form on here, but we basically email them a checklist and we give them a deadline. Usually it's 30 days. And we say, here, please complete this checklist and upload it into our database, which is, we use IRBnet. So we give them 30 days. They go through their own records, they answer all these questions. Sometimes they find stuff, right? And we get questions and they'll be like, oh, you know, I was looking at this and I found this, what do I do? And again, we use that as an educational moment. They then upload the self-assessment, it's reviewed by our staff. And then, you know, if things look good, we tell them that. We say, this was a great, you know, self-assessment, we didn't find any findings. If there's little problems, we give them education. We also give them corrective action if we identify something that's needed. So again, surprisingly, we've had great response with this. We haven't had anyone be like, no, you know what I mean? And I think they like the fact that they can do it themselves and they don't have to have the IRB on site. But it's been really successful for us. So you can, of course, modify this form to meet the needs of, you know, your particular research portfolio or, you know, whatever kinds of studies you have. All right, the next tool we have is an informed consent document review. So this can either be conducted by IRB staff or by the researcher. You know, it depends on whether you want them to do it or you want to do it. We provide them the checklist. It's completed and reviewed by staff if the staff is the one doing it. The PI may be asked to provide all signed consent forms and SM forms for a specified period. As I mentioned, we used to do these on site, and now we've been doing them remotely. We had a researcher upload, we've been doing focused on FERPA, as I mentioned, and just a few weeks ago, a researcher uploaded 450 consent forms for my staff to review. So be careful what you wish for on this. So, you know, and I told her, well, let's just do a sampling. But of course, when she started to do that, she started to find problems. And so now we have to review all 450, by we, I mean her, 450 consent forms. So, you know, some of these will end up taking you a little more time than you anticipated, but I still think it's really important. And in that particular audit, FERPA is involved. So it really does, it's something where we'll probably have to get the registrar involved, and it does involve other departments and stuff. So, so this is another great tool that's been working good for us. This one is the informed consent process. So this is really meant to be conducted by the research team when they are consenting someone. Someone else on the research team would fill this out while they observe the consenting process. Of course, the IRB could ask one of us to go out and observe this, and we would do the same thing. So this one's a little less common, but it is consistent with the regulations. And it is something where if you think there might be problems in the consenting process, this might be helpful. And it's also a great training tool for PIs to use to train new people who are doing informed consent. So we have offered it up as a tool to help them do it well. Informed consent process observation. So obviously this would be done by the IRB. We'd go to the study site and observe an informed consent discussion. We would obviously get verbal permission from the participant in order to do that. And then again, we provide feedback, education, or corrective action as needed. We have done this. It was many, many moons ago. We actually had a study in one of the prisons, and the IRB had wanted, actually our chair went to the prison and observed a consenting process there. So it was very enlightening, and it turned out that they were doing a very good job. So okay, project team review. So currently we changed our procedures so that we are no longer require people to submit amendments to us if they add project team members. We found that was bogging down our staff so much to do that. It was also kind of delaying researchers. It was just a huge task, and we tried to figure out, how important is that? So we stopped doing that, and what we asked them to do is submit a continuing review. If they have a continuing review, they submit an updated project team form. But we really have done education to tell PIs it's your job to keep this up to date, to make sure your people are trained, and make sure they have the appropriate conflict of interest forms on file. But every now and then we might check in on that, right? So this is a fairly straightforward one. We contact the PI, we say, hey, submit us your current project team form and any CITI completion reports that you have. And they upload it, and we just verify everything. So that one's, we find this helpful when they have big study teams. We have some where they have 2 pages of people listed, and sometimes the PIs get lost in that. So, this is one that we have used for that purpose. Okay, a full on-site assessment. So you notice we don't use the word audit in the title because people don't like that word. So this is something that is conducted by staff, and it basically is a full on-site audit. We just don't call it an audit because it scares people away. In this again, it's a random thing. We notify them, we give them 5 working days in advance of the assessment. This is where the staff actually goes on site. They require access to all study records and a place to review them. We interview the PI. And then prior to leaving, we provide, feedback, guidance, education. And then once we are able to review all of the findings, we will notify them of any findings through a report that we publish in IRBNet. If something major is found, we might ask them to submit an event form. If everything was great, we will tell them great job and give them kudos. So that is something we haven't done one of these honestly since the pandemic because our campus is still closed. So we haven't been able to do these, but it is something we did before. And then this is the biggie. This is when someone's been doing a no-no and the IRB thinks there's non-compliance going on. And this a directed full audit would be something that the IRB requests. We would go on site as a for-cause audit. And on these, we only give 1 day. So this is not meant to be, you know, take a week to prepare for us. There's a problem. We're going to be out there tomorrow. But we follow the same process as we do with the on-site assessment, except for the timing is different. And, you know, this is a little more urgent issue. And, you know, there might be non-compliance or safety issue involved in this. Okay, so I'm getting close to the end here. So common findings, you guys aren't going to be shocked on these, you know, consent forms, you know, the number one's a big one. You collected data and you don't have a signed consent form. What's going on there, right? You know, no signature, or people didn't print their name right. The signature dates don't match. They use the wrong version of the consent form. That never happens. Sometimes words are scratched out on the consent. You can't do that. That's a no-no. But sometimes people don't know, right? A lot of these researchers, they haven't done good clinical practice training. They don't know that you can't like make notes and stuff like that. So, you know, these are educational moments, learning moments where you can kind of go out and say, look, don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. So consent form errors are common. We find research teams training has lapsed. They're collecting data that's not described in the protocol. This is a big one. Study documents aren't stored as described. So, you know, they're talking the talk, but they're not walking the walk, right? So when we go out on site, we say, where are you storing your data? We reference the protocol and make sure that matches. Not coding data properly, not destroying identifiers, or participants who do not meet inclusion exclusion criteria. Now, if this was a high-risk clinical trial, these would be very serious findings in some cases. You know, for us, these are mostly minimal risk research, so we have to look through it through the lens of the risk to subjects and how we the outcomes of these and how we would guide the investigator to make improvements. We may have them submit an amendment and say, you're not doing it the way you're saying. This way is fine, but it's not what you told us you were doing. So you need to make a change and make sure that that's consistent. So this is a link to our post-approval monitoring policy online. Again, all of our forms are available to you. This is my contact information. If you'd like to reach out to me, if you have any questions, I am happy to talk to you about our processes. And that's all I have. So I will stop there and answer any questions that have come up.
Okay, so hi everybody. If you have a question, you can either unmute yourself or you can raise your hand and we will call on you. So I have a question, Linda. I'll get us started here.
Okay.
How do you work with the difference between novice researchers and more experienced researchers? Do you approach it at all differently when you find something that's a problem?
You know, it's a great question, but I'd have to say no, because I think one of the things with this is you have to be consistent, right? There's not different rules for someone who's been doing it a long time versus someone who's never done it. We may approach the education piece differently, but the process itself would not be different. Now, that being said, you know, we're not going to focus our monitoring activities on a student project that's 6 months and they're enrolling 3 people to do interviews, right? I mean, we're just not going to spend our time there. So chances are we're probably going to focus our monitoring efforts on kind of more robust studies that are enrolling more participants, et cetera. But once you do it, it's got to be the same for everybody. And the expectation of how you conduct the research has to be the same for everyone. Consistency is really important. Otherwise, people are going to start talking, So I think Chad
Yes.
Becker. Hi.
Hi. So thank you so much, Linda, for your presentation. Really interesting. PAM seems like it can be a big old can of worms to open that up. And wow, your findings were every part of the research process essentially can be either abused or not kind of lived up to. So that's interesting. Yeah, for sure. I have a question. It seems like this would be a great kind of deterrent, right? To know that there's a chance that your study could be monitored in this way. And I wonder, what do you do to let researchers, chairs, and candidates know that this is something that could happen? Is there a notifications? Is it clear on your website? I'm just kind of curious your process to show people, hey, this could happen to you.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I'll tell you, we had no such thing just a few years ago, right? And even before that, it was literally a free for all on our campus. There was no monitoring going on. So it's been a sea change over the last, I'd say, I've been in the office 6 years. So, and we just implemented a really formal PAM program probably about 3 years ago. And then once the revised common rule kicked in, it really became more important. We did a lot of education. We really talk about our PAM program a lot. We do presentations on it. We do workshops, and all of our workshops, which are really geared towards graduate students and stuff, we talk about post-approval monitoring. So we talk about applying to the IRB and then what happens after you get approval, to make sure people know that your interaction with us doesn't necessarily stop there, that you may need to work with us beyond that point. So it's really just, and then I do listserv announcements where I talk about post-approval monitoring. And I talked to the associate deans for research. I had to make sure, and this is something I didn't mention, it's get buy-in from the leadership. They were really worried when we first rolled this out that there was going to be kickback, that people weren't going to like it. And I'm kind of like, research compliance isn't about people liking it. It's about how do we do this in a way where we really engage with the research community and we don't make it feel punitive. We make it an educational experience. And, I think it's all in your approach, to be honest, because we have not gotten any negative feedback about our post-approval monitoring. People have been doing it. We're not slamming them either. We're not making 100% of people do a lot of work. So it's doing what's right for your program and really getting buy-in that it's for a good purpose. And you can always say it's part of the regulations. They don't know. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. That spurns another question, but I'm going to pause and let the chat kind of flow, because I see we've got a handful there too, but if needed, I'll chime in a few. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, thanks, Chad. All right, so Linda, we do have a question in the chat from Jason Malone. And Jason, you're more than welcome to chime in as well. I was just going to go ahead and read off your question, but if you would like to ask it in person, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself and ask it.
Sure. This is Jason Malone from the University of Washington. I was just curious, Linda, whether or not your institution has yet done audits of relying sites where you're serving as the single IRB, and if so, what or how did your processes maybe have to adapt to the fact that these may be even sites that are not within your same state?
No, that's a great question, and honestly, I'm not sure we have done one. We don't have a ton of. We don't have like single IRB kind of studies. We do have reliance agreements for different projects. I don't think one has come up, but what I would do is if we monitored a project that had multi-sites, we would ask the PI to make sure that that activity is implemented at all the sites, and then any feedback we got back, if there were any findings, we would definitely report that out to the institution. That's a great question, and it's actually something we should put on our list to make sure we're doing those and that that's done appropriately. But we would definitely engage with the other sites. through the PI and, have them kind of do the same thing that we're doing here, and reporting that out appropriately. So.
Thank you.
Good question.
Thanks. All right, moving down to the next question from Malathi. Malathi, again, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question. Malathi was just referencing, how do you handle post-approval monitoring in international settings?
We have not, have we done one for an international study? I think we might have. The monitoring in that situation, most of our international studies, obviously we're not going to be going on site there. A lot of them are either working with, and let me think about that. That's a great question. I think we would do the same thing. We would have them look at their paperwork and make sure they're using appropriate consent forms and all of that. The challenge would be if there were a lot of problems and we had to do some kind of remedial action. But again, I think consistency is important, and making sure that people are doing their,
Hi, Linda. Do you use Zoom and other type of things to do monitoring, post-approval monitoring? I mean, the funding agencies do that, and I'm just curious if you use any of those.
The Zoom and stuff.
Zoom and other type of, yeah.
Yeah, we haven't, and I'm going to do full disclosure. The last year, because of the pandemic, we haven't done, we were really doing a lot before, and then it kind of went down, mostly because a lot of the research was shut down. So we haven't really needed to implement those tools yet.
Okay.
The only kind of remote thing we've been doing, like if we did do one and we needed to interview the PI, we would totally engage in Zoom if it was a remote. Like I said, we're having people upload documents and document sharing software in order to have access to documents so we don't have to go on site. But, we haven't had one where we've had to really engage with an international site. Most of our international research is fairly benign, and a lot of them are actually student projects. So we haven't really focused on them.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. One more question. Could I borrow your educational resources that you use with your students and others?
Yes, we're very sharing group. So we have, our website pretty much has everything on there.
Oh, okay.
If there's something you'd like me to share that you don't see, please email me. I'm happy to share.
Thank you.
That's what I love about our community, is we're all willing to kind of share tools. So, one thing I didn't mention in my talk, because I didn't have time, and I don't want to go over time here, I know I already have, is we have a whole study tool kit. So this is stuff people can use to actually set up their study, kind of under GCP, like tracking documents and all that kind of stuff. We have a whole set of those on our website too, that we promote to help people organize their studies and execute them appropriately. So we have those available too.
Okay, thank you. And the PowerPoint that you presented will be given to us, isn't it? It will be sent to us. Okay, thank you so much. It was an excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so next, Mike Craw. I didn't know if you wanted me to read it off for you. I noticed you had mentioned it in the chat.
Oh, I can just read it off if you like. I was just wondering what kind of sanctions are appropriate for when you discover non-compliance? Is this something that you treat as an academic integrity matter? Do you do a referral to the faculty member's dean, or what would be the steps you would take?
Well, it's that famous answer, Mike, it depends. There's all different flavors of non-compliance, right? So if it's a non-compliance with human research protections policy, it would be taken care of by the IRB. So we'd probably have them submit some kind of event form that would then go to a full board for review, and then we'd take appropriate action that way, under our regulations, suspension, termination, full audit, whatever. If we discover a problem in other areas of compliance, such as conflict of interest, or you mentioned research integrity, those would be deferred out to those groups. We have different groups that deal with those issues. Knock on wood, again, it hasn't come up. I mean, we have gone out to an audit early on. This is before we actually implemented the formal PAM program. We did a random audit of an NIH funded study, and we found a pretty serious issue of noncompliance that we had to take to the board. We had to have the PI submit an event form, and they actually made a determination of serious noncompliance that then had to get reported out to OHRP. And then we went in and did a training in with the research team and, did some remedial action there. So, it really depends what it is, but we always try and focus on education, right? Luckily, our portfolio doesn't lend itself to risk to subjects. We don't have any super high risk studies, which may require different action. So hopefully that answered your question.
Oh, it does. Thank you.
Perfect. Excuse me. Okay, so next we have Winona. So you had mentioned in the chat, I don't know if you wanted to kind of chime in and ask your question off of mute. If you'd like me to read it, that's fine as well.
Okay, well, thank you for offering to read it. That would be great. And then I'll chime in after you read.
Sure, yeah, of course. So Winona asked, what is your approach to working with tribal populations, either in collaboration or in the approval process, sans tribal protocols? So specifically articulated tribal protocols.
So that's a good question. Again, our approach isn't much different. We actually have studies that we're working with tribal entities. We really don't treat them differently. It'd be, I keep going back to that, but you have to be consistent, right? So we would do the same thing if there was a tribal. We have some studies where there's no tribal IRB required, but we're working with a tribe. But we also have studies where there is oversight by a tribe IRB. So we would communicate with them as necessary. But you have to stay within your lane. We would only monitor what we have oversight of. We would not move into someone else's area. But if we found something in ours that required reporting to that group, we would definitely do that. We would probably encourage the PI to do that communication. Because you have to navigate those relationships differently. Every tribal entity is a little different. Working with the Navajo Nation is a very different experience than, kind of working with a local Pueblo here in New Mexico. So again, it depends. I hate saying that so many times, but that is our answer.
Thank you. I was asking because we're located, Heritage University is located on the Yakima Indian Reservation. I'm enrolled with my tribe in Montana. Oh. And so our concern with IRB, is typically the things that we're all concerned with the personal interpretations of what happens in observations. And so I was particularly interested in when you go out post approval and you're looking at observations of the sites or of the study, we would recommend having an elder with you or a native tribal member, regardless of whether you're working with a tribal protocol or not officially. We would recommend that you always have a tribal elder with you to help interpret those observations, because from our mainstream point of view, many people would interpret that completely differently than it would be interpreted through a native perspective. So that was the origin of my question. But thank you very much, Linda.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. Thank you, Winona, for bringing that up. And, if that came up, I would definitely heed your advice and follow whatever they suggested. We would give a lot of thought and consideration to going on site to a tribal entity and definitely follow their protocol.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions from anyone? Any last minute questions? No? All right. Thank you, Linda. Heather, are you there?
Yep. I just want to, Linda, thank you so much. That was super helpful. Just a reminder to everybody, this recording will be on the website. along with Linda's slides and the contact information. We're so grateful. Linda, we hope to host you in the Pacific Northwest
I'd love to
and
visit.
take you on a tour of all the wonderful things that we have to offer. While we don't have New Mexico green chili, we have some awesome berries and some good salmon. So, and even better wine. So we look forward to you coming to the Northwest. And thank you so much for sharing everything. I really, really appreciate it.
My
For
pleasure.
the rest of the folks, bye, Linda. Thank you. For the rest of the folks, we have a couple of links in the chat. We're going to have our roundtable sessions for large and small IRBs. You can decide if you're large or small, or maybe you want to see what the small guys do or what the big guys do. There are, the links are on the website. And so we have a little breather. Those presentations will start at 10:10. And we'll be there a bit in advance to let folks into the Zoom rooms. Again, the information should come if you've registered. If you want to go ahead and take a moment and copy in the chat, by all means do that. This way we all have a little break so we can stretch our legs. It's fun as it is sitting in front of Zoom all day. It's nice to kind of get up and move around a bit. We really look forward to a rich discussion and roundtable chats. And if you have anything, by all means, you can reach out to us as well. Any questions about that? No. Thank you guys so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Just a quick reminder, grab that link and then we will reconvene at 10:10.
And Josh, the links were sent to everybody as well, right? Everybody has the
Correct.
link. Yeah. So if you you have the links and all the emails as well.
All right.
All right,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
See you in a few
Bye.
minutes. Thank you.
Bye.